We will start now, so if you can please all find a seat now. Welcome to all of you. My name is Pohler. I'm a sociologist and I'm also a programmer, and I will facilitate this session here. The German title is Recommunilization und die Frage der Daten, but in English a more accurate title could be the question of socializing data and making data commons. And in this panel we will talk about an issue that is important and complex at the same time. It is the question of data and the use, control and ownership of data. And I personally think that this is one of the most crucial issues, political issues. It should be a central political issues for the next few years. And this is because all of us, we produce data every day. Probably some of you are at the moment producing data with your mobile phones. And we do not necessarily produce data on purpose, but through our daily activities on the internet by emailing, browsing, or searching, or discussing stuff on the internet. And we should ask some questions regarding this data. We should ask who owns and controls this data. We should ask who should own and control our data. And we should ask which kind of data should be owned and used which way and by whom. And this is what we want to do in this session. And I have two very interesting and exciting panelists here. I have Tom here, Tomislav Medak. He is a philosopher. He is the coordinator of the theory program for the Multimedia Institute in Zagreb. And he is a digital amateur librarian for the Memory of the World project. And then we have Anke Domscheit-Berg. She is a candidate for DIE LINKE for the Bundestag. She is also an entrepreneur. She's a publicist and a net activist. And our plan for the session looks like this. First, I will shortly introduce you to a position paper on big data commons that you already have, I guess, most of you. There's an English and a German version of it, and this paper should or could serve as a starting point for this discussion. About the context of this paper. This paper is the outcome of a workshop by the Berliner Gazette, and I'm one of the contributors, and Tom is also one of the contributors. But there were a lot of other people involved. And this is also, it's not a definite statement, it's work in progress. And after I introduced to you the main contents of this paper, we will have short inputs from Tom and then from Anke. And then from approximately 12:45 on, we will have an open discussion with all of you, because the whole time scheduling is delayed now. I will start by introducing you to the main content of the paper. Okay, so the main idea of the Big Data Commons paper is that we think it would be a good idea to see big data as something that could and should be governed as a commons. And by a commons, we mean a shared resource which is being produced and reproduced by a community. And when we collectively produce a resource, we should have a say in how this resource is used and controlled. This is the logic of the commons, but this logic does not yet apply to data or big data. And we think it is important that we start thinking about if big data should be and could be a commons. And this is first of all because big data and how it is used is crucially important to all of us. It concerns all of us. because the access to and the control of big data is related to huge power and also to the possibility of exploiting this power. And actually, we should not talk about the possibility, but the reality of exploitation, because we all know that it is exploited. So we know since Snowden that governments and the Secret Service agencies are spying on us. We know that corporations sell our data to make profits. And we know that increasingly corporations who maybe started as something like internet companies or ICT companies are increasingly trying to widen their scope and, for instance, become the main provider of data infrastructures in cities. So we know today that data processing is becoming a key means by which our society, economy, and our social lives are being shaped. But the collection of private data sets, the storage and the analysis of these data is organized by corporations, governments, and secret agencies. And to us as users and citizens, it's not exactly clear what happens to our data, and we don't have control over it. So although big data is a resource which is fundamentally important for our societies, there's no democratic control and there's no open access to it. And therefore we have to put things into perspective here, because we, the users, we produce more than 75% of data. And usually we don't think of those data as the product of our collective labor, and therefore we do not think of it as something that we should own collectively. What we do instead is we allow large corporations and powerful states to own our big data. So we should claim and fight for the rights as well as the capacities to govern and control our data. Because we need data governance which is transparent, fair, and for the common good. And in order to make this happen, this position paper proposes to work on 5 potential tasks that we think are necessary steps to create a future in which big data as a commons is possible. The first point is that we have to define what big data means. So we have to describe in more detail what we mean when we talk about big data commons. There are many aspects here that are complex and have to be negotiated. Just to give you one example, we don't have like a clear opinion on which kind of data should be private and should be protected and which should be public or in the commons. And maybe we have to fundamentally rethink which data should be produced at all and which data should be available at all. And the second point is about the governance of data commons. Because we think that since big data is an issue and also a potential that is not bounded by national borders and affects people on a global scale, we need some kind of transnational, multi-stakeholder governance group that is based on democratic principles. And these groups should prepare and formulate recommendations and policies for the collection, storage, and use of data. What we also need is new data infrastructures. Because the internet consists of a lot of material stuff, of nodes, optical fiber cables, internet service providers, points of internet exchange, and satellites. And currently, the large majority of that entire infrastructure is privately owned. And in order to take control over our data, it is crucial that we take control over data infrastructures. In practice, our vision would then mean that parts of that infrastructure would either be public infrastructure or commons infrastructure, or a combination of that. What we also need is, on a more local level, we need commons data centers, so we need like local networks or communities, or they don't have to be local in space. This means that you have a community of people that can together pool their data and then together take decisions collectively on what to do with their data. And the fifth point, which was called Big Data Enlightenment, is about the issue of information and knowledge and education. Because when it comes to big data and technology in general, we are faced with the problem that there are always experts who seem to have all the knowledge, and thus they have the authority to take decisions that concern all of us, while at the same time the other people feel uninformed and powerless. So we need to think about tools, techniques, or ways to empower people in this field of big data and the data commons. Yeah. This is in short what you have on these position papers here. There's a much longer version that you can find on the internet. And as I told you before, we won't go into discussion now, but we will have 2 inputs now. And the first input will be by Tom, and I'll just give you the microphone.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for to the organizers for this opportunity to. Okay, this is better. For this opportunity to speak. What I will try to do is to delimit more clearly the space of political agency, which is more tactical than strategic, I would say. And I will try to do this through a shift of perspective, looking critically at the discourse through which we speak of communization of information infrastructures. And that shift of perspective is shifting it from the framework of communicative action to the framework of relations of production, which I think is largely missing from the discourse and hence entails a lot of skew in what we talk about. So first, 3 critical observations related to fundamental assumptions of this debate. First relates to the notion of freedom and democracy. Second relates to the notion of privacy and personhood. And third relates to, to the epistemological value or utility of big data. So, haven't done anything, but yeah, it's working. Okay. So first to freedom. I think that the fundamental concept in the legitimating edifice of internet and internet culture has been the notion of freedom. And when one looks at this from the point of view of history, what has unfolded over the last 3 decades, it's clearly that this notion has been very much entangled with the political domination of capitalist democracies. So a hegemony of a very particular kind of political framing after the demise of socialist systems. And that has entailed a very specific notion of democracy, one that is focused on political participation, so the public sphere, and on the other hand, on social reallocation of wealth. But what has been missing, and that is somehow clear for somebody coming from a socialist self-managed system that has lived over the both in socialist Yugoslavia and in present capitalist Croatia, is that democracy has to do also with, at very existential level, with how we participate in social production. So in the decision making on what we produce, how we produce it, what are the relations of production. And I think by the domination of the discourse of freedom, and it's captured in, I don't know, Declaration of Independence, or the Stuart Brand's idea, information wants to be free. So by focusing on that, on freedoms, civil liberties have been recoded through the market. So you have freedom of choice, freedom of expression, freedom of exchange, but there is a very thin notion of freedom, no notion of equality there. And that's, I think, fundamental problem with the internet as a social apparatus. No, that discourse, I think, has settled, sedimented deep in what we understand as this cultural and social technique of internet. Second, the notion of, maybe I should say that that has meant also that the model of social market democracy has been eviscerated, except in the few countries. So Germany is probably the last one, and maybe Austria and a couple of others standing, but that model is normatively no longer valid. And commons has been very much a symptom of the evisceration of that model. They are calling in that sense that everybody is allocated according to their needs, and that the allocation is according to what resources we possess as a society. But I think that that notion still is premised on the separation of the sphere of production from the sphere of social reproduction that exists in the notion of capitalist democracy. So second observation relates to the notion of privacy. So I think that we frequently frame the question of who owns the data, we produce the value, et cetera, but I think if one looks further down into history, kind of from point of view of German media theory, let's say, one can see that state has produced or information systems that have produced data in relation to personhood long time ago. A good example is, for instance, introduction of street numbers. So Vienna introduced it in 1777, and they were called Conscriptionsnummer. So it means they were numbers for conscription into the imperial army. And in that sense, state created a certain relation that was data-driven relation between its subjects and its operation. And that was then obviously captured by the emergent capitalism. Now think of mail order catalogs. They were a business model premised on that technology of data. So, and one more point to that. We usually consider this as how data is captured by the state from the citizens and by the businesses from the consumers. But throughout the long history of capitalism, the data has been captured from the workers by the capital. Think of scientific management, or think what has recently been called logistical media. So there has been a transfer, a capture of data on the capacity of living labor long time. And that, I think, is still predominant, and we need to look at that. And thirdly, related to utility, and this kind of addresses the question, do we need to socialize all big data? Do we need all the big data that exists? There has been the example of Al Jazeera journalist Ahmad Mufaq Zaidan, who was mistaken by NSA drug network for a terrorist, for simple reason that he was in contact with high-level Al-Qaeda operatives in order to interview them. But looking at the electronic metadata, that was not clear. Or consider racial bias in predictive policing. So in that sense, we could say that big data can kill, and that's an important point to consider. Even more, empiricism has become dominant. Now, Chris Anderson has said it's the end of theory, it's obsolescence of scientific method, and that belief that that what you can extract from looking only at data is a very particular form of forceful imposition. It's betting on that you can understand making social inferences and understanding social reality so that it can capture value from it. So, so much for the framing. Let's look at the limits to commoning. First, and this has been already stated, the scale of infrastructure. No, it's simply unfeasible that it can be reproduced at the level at which we are commonly speaking about big data, algorithms, social media. The problem, so I guess a small data center is like 50,000 servers. It consumes electricity at the scale of a city. The global consumption of electricity by data centers would rank as a 6th country. So that all is really, really hard to produce. Second, there is the problem of geography. No technology, general purpose technology, so technology that transforms the entire economic system, has been more tied to hegemony in the capitalist world system than computing. No? The US is, in that sense, the global hegemon, and much of the largest IT companies are headquartered there. Much of the innovation, or if not all innovation, market innovation primarily, happens there. And they are still pulling the levers of regulation on internet. No, just the other day, Donald Trump said, like, no, we don't need to surrender ICANN to global governments. So that's I think, to consider how much you can regulate these things, particularly as they are developing. And then on the question of development, it is clear that the technological development is driven by expansion of commodification and, significantly, how you can optimize, increase productivity of other sectors of economy. No, that's the meaning of general purpose technology. And this is happening at a much greater speed than we are able to organize, commonize, or socialize technologies. Data and labor. So how have these technologies, cybernetic systems since the Second World War, internet over the last 3 decades, big data over the last decade, transformed relations in the global capitalism? First, it is obviously the continued descaling and automation. There's this famous study by people from Martin Oxford Institute that 47% of jobs in America are replaceable by machines. They have transformed global production chains. They have brought a revolution in advertising, so realization of capital that has also changed how our media operate. And they have also transformed hugely financialization. More specifically related to labor in the IT, I think the problem with the labor in IT is it's probably one of the few remaining sectors of labor that is still upwardly mobile, at least a segment of it. So programming labor primarily. And that throws up a lot of questions. And it didn't help that there is a push toward entrepreneurialism in that sector. No, that startups have fully transformed the field, and this is really felt in the hacker community, where many people who were before working for the man during the day and then working on a social cause during the night are now basically working on a social cause to sell it to venture capital. And that really reconfigures hacker scene, I think. So what is to be done? That's really hard. But I think that this has to have many tiered forms of engagement. First, and this has already been mentioned, we need some form of agency of citizens over the use of big data algorithms. And there are a number of proposals like statutory transparency, auditing of algorithms, limitation on collection, retention, and merging of data sets, prohibition of data markets, and ability to manage own data that relates particularly to essential aspects of our livelihoods, such as health, credit rating, employment history. So that's one direction of work, and I think it's significant. We shouldn't cede the space on that, political space on that. I think the second element should be to repoliticize the production, and that means working with people in labor in IT, and it means working with those who are being automated away by labor in IT and creating platforms, primarily trade union platforms, that could make that clear and create meaningful alliances against the speed up of how these technological systems are used to transform the social production. Then third element would be something more along the lines of how do we construct models of socialized or collectivized production that still can self-reproduce within the real existing capitalism. No, that's the problem, that we usually create small platforms and they get either commodified away or just the speed of technological developments obsoletes them, or if you are outside of the center of capitalist world, then you steal, but those platforms of stealing get stolen away from you at some point. So I think something along the lines of intermodal forms of production that Michel Bauwens has been proposing, or I guess cooperativism that Trevor Schultz has been proposing, might be on the table. And lastly, I think we need to radicalize the hackers for equality. Now, much of the focus has gone into security, surveillance, and all of that, to very little appeal in the broader segments of demography or of voters. It has maybe been mainstreamed in Germany, but I think it holds little political valence unless we are able to see how the economy is transforming due to technology, and not just our capacity to be empowered citizens or not to be under immediate control of the state. So if this can happen within larger social movements, democratization of technology, so technology that everybody can use, maybe scaled down from the scales we are usually talking about when we are talking about big data. Then the struggle for democracy at the place where we labor and reproduce ourselves might become a struggle for the future and not simply for the workers' past. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Anke, do you want to continue?
I'd like to directly add to the last things you said, Tom, because I believe in the democratization of production and of means of production and of information needed to produce something, because that's the core of every society and who has power. And I also grew up in a socialist country in East Germany, so I know that the socialist way didn't work. And I know that it's quite hard to just kill capitalism, but I think that communism with C and 2 O's is a way of just, I don't know, get rid of capitalism bit by bit. And I believe that it's a very, very powerful way of doing it, because capitalism cannot do anything against it. And the democratization of production is one reason why that is the case. I just read in the last days of a very interesting case where somebody who owned the recipe for a malaria drug increased the price for 1 dose of the drug to $500. So many patients just couldn't pay anymore for it, and they depended on it. And Australian students decided that they don't like that, and they reinvented the drug inventing another way of producing the exact same drug for $2. And that was their present to the world. So there's no patent on it, no copyright, no nothing. It's common now. And there is nothing, even the biggest pharmaceutical company with the highest paid lawyers can do against it. Just nothing. Their value proposition for the $500 drug is just killed. And this is how we should do it more often, sharing the knowledge to solutions for problems everywhere in the world. And when we talk about, or I talk about democratization of production, I think of new technologies like 3D printing. And what do you need to do this? Decentralized, democratized means of production. You need to have a printer. You can now get recipes for how to assemble a printer yourself, even from electrical rubbish. You need material. Now there is information out how you can assemble little machines to produce your own material out from plastic waste or other waste, for example. And then you need, of course, a printing file, the digital description of a 3D object. And then there are databases like Thingiverse, where it's attached to a company, but my vision for the future is to have something like Wikipedia, just with digital files in it. But even on Thingiverse, you can use it like that because it's all free files. You can search and download and press the button print on your own printer and produce things. And this has been done, for example, for digital files on how to print hand prostheses, which on average, good hand prosthesis costs $30,000. You can now print it for under $10 and make it accessible to even landmines victims in Laos who couldn't pay for anything like that before. So this is how I believe we can undermine capitalist power structures by sharing data and information, especially on how to do things. I think we also need to apply the rules which we know from the traditional world to the digital world. Because in the last industrial revolution, society learned the hard way that monopolies abuse their power. And that's why most nations have anti-monopolistic laws. But who is doing something like that in the digital world? Now we have monopolies bigger than ever in the world. The Facebooks and Amazons and Googles of the world. They have an enormous power, and like brick and mortar monopolies, they abuse their power because that's the nature of monopolies. So what we have to fight for is find global ways, global governance ways on how to break the power of monopolies, because that is very closely related to the big data stores they have. The bigger a company is, the bigger the data they have, and the bigger the potential for abuse of this data is. So we must not only think about how do we as people create own big data pools, but also how do we break down the big data to smaller pools of big data, which is today owned by big corporations. Also, I think that we have to fight for user and citizen-friendly terms and conditions. This is an absolutely nightmare, the terms and conditions, like where everybody clicks accept and has never read it because it's 100 pages long, very tiny writing, and in a legal language nobody normal understands. And we have to fight for the right of simple, short, and easy terms and conditions, which prohibit that data is required to use, for example, an app, which is not necessary for the app to function. And that's a legal entitlement we must fight for. So as you can hear, I'm not only talking in favor of having alternative big data, but to take care of the big data which already is out there and is abused. There are things citizens can do to free information and free data. And for example, I was talking about we need to share global solutions for global problems. And of course, scientific research is a part of that. And you know that lots of research is never going public, even if it was partially funded by taxpayers. So very often it's only published if it's published in very expensive scientific papers where many people have no access to because it's too expensive to buy them. But there have been scientists who realized that it's even to bring science more forward, to do better research, you need to get access to the global status quo of research on a particular field. So some researchers created ResearchGate, a big platform, which today offers the possibility, and several millions of scientists already use it globally, to publish their own stuff, which is possible because they treat it like a Facebook of scientists, and they are allowed to publish their own stuff on their own webpage. So everybody has a tiny little profile with their own webpage within ResearchGate, but it's searchable, and it's a great overall database with thousands and thousands and thousands of searchable research data. And these are the things we have to do. And I see there are many other interesting smaller examples where we can see how people can also collect and create their own type of big data to the benefit of the society and not of some companies who want to make a profit. Like there are many patients out there who share their experience with the side effects on medication and effectivity of medication. What today is still missing, and this could be invented and done, not too complicated, I believe, if social hackers do it, is build a global database with anonymized data of patients where they globally share in a searchable database their experience with medication. Then never again a pharmaceutical company can say, oh, we didn't know about that. Because it's public and everybody can see it and it's transparent, and people can also get an informed decision themselves on whether they want to take the risk of taking a certain drug or not. Then there are lots of people globally sharing genealogical data. There are millions of standardized family trees, which you can also search globally. And I can find my own back to 1500 something on the site of my mother, which is extremely interesting because if you think it big and you think you can create a global family tree where every person is in there, this would kill all racist arguments at once. Because people would find out pretty soon that they are related to everybody else. And I always like the DNA research here, because of course it's difficult, and I don't recommend sharing your DNA because it not only affects your personal data, but also all your relatives' DNA is indirectly published if you publish your DNA, and you shouldn't decide on their privacy. But if you look at the DNA data, and scientists have done it, you can find out that something like 7,000 years ago from Syria, yeah, no joke, from Syria and from Turkey, the farmers walked to Europe and somehow had better conditions than the European hunters, so that they replaced 90% of the hunters. So 90% of today's Europeans all come from farmers who came 7,000 years ago from Syria, which is killing racism too, I believe. So knowing more about these relationships, because you know the data behind it, could be quite interesting also for social discussions. Then there have people created an open source platform called Ushahidi. I'm sure you have heard about that, which was used many, many times in the last years in various places in the world to collect, to crowd collect data which is particularly relevant in crisis situation. So that started in Kenya when there were big upheavals and violence going on after the presidential elections in 2007 and 2008. So they were using the localized data of things that happened in all places, and people could get a better overview compared to even public media. And this has been used to inform the public and to collect data and share data again to the mutual benefit of everybody involved after the earthquake in Haiti, in many other African countries, for example, when there were problems with pharmacies running out of stock, so people could find where they could find available medication, etc. Violence has been mapped various times in various countries, so I think that whenever you localize data, it's of particular value, and I can imagine many other incidents where you can do that and collect this type of data. Of course, maps like OpenStreetMap, that's also shared data, usable by many others, and the benefits it can create you see at other maps like Wheelmap. Wheelmap is based on OpenStreetMap, and Wheelmap collects the metadata of locations globally of how barrier-free a certain location is. So with a traffic light system, you can see whether a certain location like this one is barrier-free or not. And you can do this for public institutions, for educational institutions, for cultural institutions, for cafes, for bars, for theaters, just for every location. And people collect this data, share this data, and it's open source data, it's public data, so people could also use the data, analyze it, and get some additional information out of it. And then there's an interesting German invention, or development, which is called Mundraub. Mundraub, I really don't know how to translate that to English, but this is a word describing somebody steals food for hunger. So it's usually not punished if you just get food for your own hunger. Mundraub is a public map, also based on OpenStreetMap, where you can crowd collect data and, of course, look it up, the data, where there are fruit trees. It started in Germany, so you find public fruit trees on public land, thousands and thousands in Germany. But I just checked yesterday night, it's spread all over the globe. So now you find fruit trees in Latin America, fruit trees in India, in Australia, and that's very interesting because it's sharing the data helps sharing public physical goods, like fruit, and make it useful for everybody else. Coming to an end, I'd like to at least shortly highlight the relevance of structures. My train were very late, so I couldn't listen to the speech prior to this one, but I believe it was talked about social media like Facebook. I think the future should be that we not necessarily develop our own Facebooks, maybe yes, but that it's more important to have alternative data structures where our data, which is used by social networks, is stored. So we could have all our own privacy-protected little clouds with our status in there and history of status, our relationships, our pictures. And when we want to share that with a specific social network, we allow access, and we can all the time say, no, today I don't want you anymore. And then this social network, like for example Facebook or any other network, has no longer access to my data. So I own the accessibility to my data and nobody else. And if we talk about infrastructure, we also have to talk about the backbone of the internet, glass fiber. And I particularly like the Swedish model, where 2/3 of the cities own their own fiber network. And these are symmetric speed for people. So they are not only treated as consumers who download Netflix movies and watch all the time, binge watching, but also they use the internet to upload stuff and contribute to the global community and share information. And to do that, you need equal speed also for upload. And to make this possible, you need fiber, and of course it's easier for secret services and big corporations to attack your fiber if they have control over the fiber, and it's much harder if you decentralize fiber networks and have it in public ownership like they did in Sweden. And at this point, I'd come to an end, although the story could be much bigger, but I'd like to have a discussion with all of you now.
Do you want to respond to this directly, Tom, or do you want to start? Okay. So we now come to the part where you become part of this discussion, and I wanted to try something with you. I imagined you sitting way closer together than you are now, but what we want to do is that before you have to talk into a microphone and to the whole room, if you want to say something or ask something, we will have 5 minutes of a Murmelrunde. Murmelrunde is a German word, and like Mundraub, I wouldn't know how to translate it. Oh, memo round. Well, the way it works is you choose a person next to you. It could be a person on either side of you. It could be a person sitting in front of you or behind you. And if possible, choose a person that you don't know yet. And you have 5 minutes to talk to this person about what you think is important about data and what you think we should talk about in the discussion now. And what is also important is that afterwards, when we open the discussion, if you don't feel comfortable with English, you can always ask something in German. We will translate it for you. And you have now 5 minutes to talk to someone in this audience. And I will let you know after 5 minutes.
Sehr langsamer Weg, ne? Also auf jeden Fall, ja, das stimmt. Ja, genau. Stimmt. Ja, genau, ja, ja. Ja, ich weiß nicht, was das Ding ist auch, das auf dem deutschen Kontext ist schön und gut, aber zum Beispiel China, glaube ich, die sind viel schneller als voran. Das ist wirklich auch so, die Programme, wirklich kontrolliert werden soll. Der Lebensstil etc. Auswirkungen auf die Gesundheitsversorgung und Umstände hat. Das sind halt die Gegenbewegungen. Das ist irgendwie immer noch den Vorteil des Monopols zu sein, die großen Datenkonzerne, die großen Konzerne, die Daten sitzen. Und das Gefühl, das ist ein Organisationsvorteil. Das sind so politisches und Prozesse. Aber jetzt halt so einzelne, ja, das schöne Gut ist, so einzelne Commons und sowas, der gegen mich angekommen zu Preisen. Zu Black Mirror. Ja, also ich meine, das ist natürlich wirklich total, was da gezeigt wird, aber so weit weg ist es gar nicht. Ja, das ist, glaube ich, total. Genau. Ja, man weiß nicht, was jetzt in 5 Jahren noch weiter ist. Ja, genau. Das ist genau einfach die Tendenz viel stärker. So Grassroots-Bewegung sozusagen. Wir machen jetzt immer hier ein Internetportal, das ist zu Hause. Das ist total schön und gut, aber ich weiß nicht, ob das wirklich Daten erzeugt wie jetzt in den letzten 2 Jahren. Also, ich meine, was heißt das? Ja? Also, genau, das ist so
Die Menschen machen noch das Gleiche.
ja, genau. Ja, total, klar, das wird einfach aufgezeichnet. Das heißt ja aber...
We have to continue now. It's really nice to see all of you talking to each other, but we also want to hear what you are talking. And we only have 25 minutes left, so we would now start with the open discussion here. As far as I know, there's someone with a microphone in this room. Yeah, you're here with a microphone. So we're not sure about the best modality, how to do this now, but we think we start with, you can ask a question and you get a direct answer, and if there are too many questions, we might start collecting questions. But who wants to say something, or who has a question? That's good.
So he asked, why isn't there a bit of an assumption that the common will automatically be good, or something like that, right? That communism would automatically take us away from capitalism towards some kind of utopia. Did I get you right? And also, how does it relate to kind of these commons of knowledge? How do they relate to the material infrastructure of production? How do you make the link back to people who actually make things in factory, the global division of labor?
I didn't get that last part of the question. What was, or the comment?
The acoustics are not very good. I didn't understand.
The first part is there an assumption? Is there, like, the way the common is thought of, or there's an assumption of goodness, that everything that's organized as a commons will automatically be better? And the second one is how do the big data commons relate to material production, like factory work or agricultural work?
Oops, or do you want to go first? Okay, so I think related to the second part of the question, obviously this doesn't relate one-to-one. We have some concepts to understand that, like Marxian concept of general intellect, where the means of production are developing through a particular division of labor, separation of manual intellectual labor, and then intellectual labor becomes a specialized field, where knowledge is produced, and much of that knowledge is how to increase productivity of factors of production. And that much of the technoscience is dedicated to that. So that, I think that's how we need certain conceptual framework to understand this. And we also see some evidence how this is working, that the separation of manual and intellectual labor, it not being the separation between those who work physically and those who produce ideas or spiritual products of the mind, but rather being separation within the sphere of production. And we can see some effects of that. We see that automation is progressing and that it's encompassing broader and broader segments of labor, even segments of labor that are clerical work or that are intellectual work. So I think that's the way to understand what's going on. We need to understand that particular forms of separation of labor in the process of production reflect on how that is transforming. And what was the first part? What was the commons? No, I don't think that they are necessarily always good, but also then the question is, how do you define good? So I think there are several concepts of the commons, and then we need to be clear which one we use. Usually they are, at least in this paper, understood as a form of collective production that has a governance model of their own, so it entails certain value of autonomy. It also entails certain sightedness. So I think these values work against the generalized capitalist model of production, and insofar it reflects rather a tendency of social movements, grievances, etc., than it being really a concept that can be fully situated in an analytical framework. Mine is Marxian, but I think it, in that sense, needs some relation to how production is structured and how commons in that sense get appropriated as well. We, coming from the world of free software, and you really need to think about how free software was absorbed by large internet monopolies 20 years down the line. And it's not a static thing. No, there is no good forever. It changes. We could also look at how history of computing has changed the scales from large mega computers to mainframes, so toward microcomputing, toward personal computing, but now we are experiencing progression in the opposite direction towards centralization of infrastructure and limitation of general computing of the devices that we use. So they become kind of applications attached to very much a centralized service with very little capacity to operate on it. So, yeah.
And, I'd like to shortly add to that. I also don't think that commons are by nature always good, because they have to be guided by value principles like privacy. For example, if you just I invent something, find a way how to collect and commonize the data which is collected when you browse the internet, and now everybody can use my data where I browsed the internet and what I did there. I don't think it's a good idea. So you have to have guiding principles like how to protect privacy and things like that on what kind of data you want to commonize and to provide to the general public. And therefore, a lot depends on who defines the guidelines and what is in those guidelines. As to the connection to production, I'd like to come back again to my, I really like this, the 3D printing stuff, because it's the most direct connection to production of something, to sharing knowledge and how to actually do it. And I gave you the example of the prothesis, and there's also, for example, there was in the Gaza Strip, which was blocked from the outside, like Aleppo today, there was a doctor who had no more stethoscope in the hospital. And then he reverse engineered the stethoscope, produced his own model, he 3D printed it, and now it has the exact same quality like a $200 stethoscope, but it only costs $1.50. And he also shares this knowledge. So everybody in the world can now produce a high-quality stethoscope for $1.50. And this is the very direct connection of I share knowledge and how to do something. There is an available means of production which is cheap and decentral and does not need a big company and lots of means of investment. So the barrier to entry to become a producer yourself is extremely low. And then the cost of production go down to close zero. And this has an enormous revolutionary potential. I think we are only at the very, very, very beginning of what this could mean. You can also share how to produce cars, for example. And I mean, one of the 3D printed cars, the DM Blade Supercar it's called, it looks really crazy. It is commercial, but you can get the 3D printed parts together with an IKEA-style assembly paper, and in 30 minutes, without any prior education, if you have ever done something like Lego technique, you can assemble this car yourself. And this, as I said, is a commercial car. But you could also invent a car like that and share it with the world. And everybody could also assemble it in 30 minutes and be their own car producer. Not everybody might want to do it, but the possibility to be able to do this, share this knowledge, and just break the power of big global car producers, I think that's a really cool idea. And we should do more of this in the future, and we will.
Thank you. Do you hear? Yeah. Thank you for your presentations. I think it was very, the insight of the historical examples that you presented, Tom, they are also like, they're bringing light into what's happening nowadays. And there are a lot of examples that you, Anke, brought in that I think they bring hope, that there is something that can be made, of course, and there is an optimism there. Now there are, of course, some paradoxes on the political side with what is a democracy, right? A democracy, of course, when we speak about democracy, is like, okay, there's something brilliant there. If we can just make this massive, and these solutions can get out there to everyone, then that's the good side of democracy. But the thing is that many of these examples, they have worked in a communal level, or like a short scale, a smaller scale than what capitalism has achieved with these major companies and things. So at some point, yes, there is like this innovation, creation, and it provides some solutions at some point, at some level, but then at some point you get stuck, and it creates its own kind of probably its own hegemonists, hackers that are enlightened persons that can organize projects or something, but then the majority of the population is left outside. Of course, the ideal is to get to them, and yes, that's why democracy is important. But the way democracy is structured nowadays is still majorities rule. So there is a minority trying to change things or trying to say something, trying to apply a solution, but there is, on the other side, something that for some reason, maybe because they're not engaged enough, or they're not educated enough, or they are attached to manual labor, or they just don't have the education to do something else, or they are just living outside the centers of production, and these majorities are tackled by politicians. And as a result, for example, we have seen the development of populism today. Like nowadays, it's a huge emerging wave in politics. And what to do there then? Like these majorities, they are kind of taken on by the fears or what's going to happen. The populist leaders are attacking these things that are very sensible, and these projects, they need some kind of another kind of knowledge which is not out there for everybody for different reasons. So what to do with this paradox of democracy?
Can I? This is an extremely important question, because we see the dangerous impact in many places in the world, including here in Germany. And I think this has to do with us as a society globally facing a new industrial revolution, which always comes with big disruptions, with breaking power structures, large-scale insecurity, and opens the door for everybody who paints very black and fearful pictures. Because people find this believable, because they see where it's true and happening, like job loss they are told it's because of China, but actually it's because of digitalization. What we need to counteract this process is, of course, better education, which we can't change from one day to another, but we also we need to have other stories. They don't talk from brain to brain. They talk from stomach to stomach. They talk emotions. And we try to counter this with facts. They don't listen to facts. It doesn't work. Which does not mean we never reply with facts, but we should also use emotional storytelling. That's why I tell these stories about the prothesis and the doctor in Gaza Strip, and we need more of those stories, and we need a positive vision for the future. We need to take the time and the heart and the brain to paint a picture of the same status quo, but with another future than the black one, which the brown ones are painting right now. And I personally hope that this is a working way, because I don't see any other. The educational way is important, but takes too long time. We now have to have our hearts talking to them and give hope and hope instead of fear. That would be my approach.
I think the problem is also, does society direct the development of technology, if technology is so disruptive? Marina Mazzucato has analyzed quite a bit of where a technology gets massive scaling and deployment, and she thinks there has been a substantive change in that from the post-Second World War period to a model where now it's pretty much to the market to command those forces and not so much to the state. I'm not saying that the state model is better, but I think we need to think if we want to control which technologies get developed, in what way they should work. I mean, there are what's typically framed as big challenges facing humanity, and those challenges are quite real, and they are hard to operate in a fully deregulated capitalist world system. I think that's the primary problem of regulation, and only after that can we ask the question, okay, how do we go after a certain direction of technological development? I mean, that's obviously part of the political shift that is now happening in the US as well. No, if it's capital that will define how state will regulate, or if it's state that will regulate what capital will develop. And I think that's a real kind of antagonism unfolding there, primarily related to climate change and shift to sustainable, a more sustainable technological composition, if that's possible. I have my doubts, but I have forgotten the first part about democracy, no, in more general terms. Yeah, I think that the problem is also that political system is fully detached from forming deep connections with what we would traditionally call bases, that it has become very much poll-driven politics, speaking of big data or data analysis, and that in that sense we think, arguments, public arguments made in public do not matter anymore. People are deciding to vote based on their emotions. No, this from stomach to stomach. But I think the love of cold argument is just the passion of liberal elites, such as us here. And we have to understand that rationality is deeply embodied and cited within the social relations, and that passions have something to do with the forms of rationality, and therefore it's not so much us and them. I think it's very much how do we understand what the passions are, and this relates to the question, okay, what is the model of the society that we want, and how do we come to discuss that? If you look at the statistical data of Brexit, or that was the argument being made, it's mostly those who are the losers of neoliberal transition that have voted. No, you don't agree with that? Okay, so, oh, could be. So, but I think this is really a question, no? Like, can we have a vision of social development that is in sync with the idea that it's all of us taking part in defining political decisions in a democracy? And that's, I think, what needs to happen in a certain way, be it in a way of disruption and lots of social antagonism, which looks more realistic, or be it as a public debate. I don't have much hope for that, though.
Our time is almost over, but if it's okay for you, because there was one question here on the left, we would take one more question.
Thank you. So it was more actually a comment and what came out of our little discussion here. My name is Sophie Bloemen. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I especially also appreciated this analysis on that what we're missing in the current kind of paradigm of democracy that we use is this participation in the relations of production, which relates to really the co-governance of our production and our resources as well, which I think is really the essence of what the Commons is about. So I think that's really to the point. And to the question, what is it important if we talk about commons and data? I think these things both came up, but I wanted to put them more clearly together. I think at one point there is this, as with Anke really focused on, is more this building of this new world, this alternative economy, which technology does allow us to do to some extent, through sharing knowledge, for example. But at the same time, I think, or we thought, that it's really very much a political fight as well. We can only produce this world if we also, at the institutional level, at the governance level, allow for the facilitation and protection of this alternative economy to be built. So I would think it's these two sides that we need to work on. And then this idea of this positive vision of alternative story is very important at the same time to facilitate that fight. So I don't know if you have comments on that. Thanks.
Concluding word.
Yeah, I think it was a good concluding statement, but if you, I mean... Oh, there's still a question. Okay, we have...
That was a question.
Yeah, well,
Oh, it was...
Was it a question or was it a comment?
it was more of a comment, but I didn't open it. If you want to respond,
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there are not many final things to say, but one thing I want to at least give you as a thought getting out of this room is that we heard that 75% of data is produced by people. Very soon, more than half of the data will be produced by machines communicating to machines in the Internet of Things world. And then I find it particularly interesting to ask who owns this data. If, for example, an autonomous driving vehicle is driving as part of the public transport, is the entire movement pattern open data and accessible to everyone? And there are many, many more, and some of them are really dangerous because they get into the privacy issue. But thinking that already now more things than people are connected to the internet, and I think in 2020 it will be more or less 50 billion things connected to the internet. The data created there and what of it can be made common is a quite interesting thought.
Well then, I think this was also a nice concluding statement, or a nice thought to take with you for the lunch break now. And thank you all for having discussed with us.